He was called the wisest man who ever lived. Kings and queens crossed deserts, mountains, and seas just to sit in his presence. His words built nations, his wisdom shaped generations, and his wealth dazzled the world. And yet, his story doesn't end in glory. It ends in tragedy. How could the wisest man fall so low? That's the paradox at the heart of Solomon's life, a paradox most people ignore. What if wisdom alone isn't enough to protect you? What if brilliance without obedience leads straight to ruin? Solomon's life forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. Greatness can collapse when the heart drifts from God. And maybe, just maybe, his hidden tragedy is a mirror for our own struggles today, because the same temptations that pulled him down are still pulling at us. In this video, you'll discover how Solomon didn't fall because he lacked wisdom, but because wisdom without obedience slowly destroys the heart. In this journey, we're going to uncover what really happened in Solomon's final days, not just the history, but the hidden lessons that echo into our modern lives. Lessons about compromise, divided hearts, and the cost of ignoring truth. What makes Solomon's fall so disturbing is that it didn't begin with idols. It began with choices that looked wise. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might change the way you see wisdom and the way you see yourself. Solomon wasn't just another king, he was the very picture of majesty in his time. His reputation spread across borders, echoing through distant nations like a song of wonder. Kings, rulers, and scholars traveled unimaginable distances just to sit in his presence. They came not for war, not for wealth, but for wisdom. Imagine it. Powerful leaders leaving their thrones, humbling themselves as students before one man. In today's world, it would be like global leaders flying across the world to hear a single lecture from someone whose insight was worth more than gold. There was something undeniably divine in the way Solomon spoke, thought, and acted. His palace was more than a residence. It was the beating heart of prosperity. Gold, silver, and cedar wood adorned its halls, each detail reflecting a kingdom overflowing with abundance. Scripture tells us in 1 Kings 10:21, all King Solomon's goblets were gold, and all the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. Think about that. What others considered precious, Solomon's court treated as common. It's a picture of excess so staggering that even modern billionaires would struggle to compare. And then came the temple, the crown jewel of his reign. More than architecture, it was the dwelling place of God's glory on earth. Its walls shone with pure gold, its chambers carried the fragrance of incense, and its design mirrored heaven itself. In 2 Chronicles 7:1-2, we read, when Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. The priests could not enter the temple of the Lord because the glory of the Lord filled it. Imagine being there, watching fire fall from the sky as a visible sign of divine approval. For the people, it wasn't just a building. It was proof that God dwelt among them. But Solomon's greatness wasn't only displayed in stone and gold, it flowed from his words. He authored over 3,000 proverbs, each one a jewel of practical wisdom, and wrote over 1,000 songs that carried both poetry and truth. The book of Proverbs is a treasure chest still opened by millions today. Consider this verse. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Proverbs 3:5. These weren't mere words. They were guiding principles that shaped lives, businesses, families, and nations. His voice became a bridge between heaven and earth. And yet, in the midst of brilliance, a shadow began to form. It was quiet, almost invisible, like the faint crack in a wall that no one notices at first glance. His heart, once fully devoted to the Lord, began to drift ever so slightly. And that is often how downfalls begin, not with a sudden collapse, but with a silent shift, like a great ship turning just 1 degree off course. At first it seems trivial, but given enough time, it leads to an entirely different destination. Solomon's wisdom was unmatched, but his heart wasn't immune to compromise. In his pursuit of peace, prosperity, and political influence, Solomon began to form alliances with surrounding nations. These weren't just casual friendships, they were sealed through marriage, a practice common in the ancient world. But here's the difference. Solomon didn't marry once or twice to secure peace. He married hundreds of times, each union a strategic contract dressed up as romance. Scripture is clear in 1 Kings 11:3. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. What looked like wisdom on the surface slowly became a snare. Each alliance carried with it more than political promises. It carried culture, customs, and most dangerously, gods. Think of it this way. Every marriage was like opening a door in Jerusalem to another altar, another way of life, another voice. At first glance, it must have seemed harmless, maybe even smart after all. Who doesn't want peace with their neighbors? But compromise often begins with something that looks wise. It's like someone today excusing dishonesty in business by saying, "It's just how the world works," without realizing that small cracks eventually break the foundation. The influence of these foreign wives didn't come overnight. It crept in slowly, like ivy wrapping itself around a wall. Their words were whispers, not shouts. But whispers can be powerful when repeated day after day. They carried the traditions of their homelands, the songs of their gods, and the rituals of their worship. Imagine the tension in Solomon's chambers. On one side, the God of Israel, who had given him wisdom beyond measure. On the other, the quiet but persistent pull of loyalty, love, and cultural expectation. Which voice would prevail? The danger of alliances like these is that they don't just touch politics, they touch the heart. God had warned his people in Deuteronomy 7:3-4, "Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you." Solomon knew these words. He had studied the law. Yet somewhere along the line, he convinced himself he could manage it, that he could balance devotion to God with devotion to his wives. But divided devotion always leads to disaster. This is where Solomon's story feels uncomfortably close to our own. How many times do we make alliances, not with nations, but with habits, with people, with compromises that we think we can control? Maybe it's that relationship you know is pulling you away from God, or that deal at work that requires a little dishonesty. It doesn't seem like much at first, but small cracks always spread. And Solomon's alliances, brilliant as they may have looked politically, were the first cracks in the foundation of his reign. It began so quietly that many in Israel might not have even noticed. At first, Solomon's compromises looked like private matters of the heart, hidden within the palace walls. But compromise always seeks expression, and soon altars began to rise across the land. Not for the God of Israel, but for foreign deities, erected out of affection for his wives and their traditions. 1 Kings 11:7-8 tells us, "On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods." What had once been unthinkable in Israel was now normalized. Imagine walking through the streets of Jerusalem in those days. You would still see the temple, golden and glorious, its priests carrying out their duties. But now, from the hills surrounding the city, other sights and sounds competed for attention. Smoke rising from pagan altars, the distant rhythm of foreign songs, the cries of sacrifices made to gods with strange names. It must have been confusing. How could the city chosen by God now be filled with rival voices? The holy and the profane coexisted side by side, and the people learned a dangerous lesson. If the king himself could serve two masters, then maybe they could too. Idolatry rarely begins as outright rebellion. It begins as a whisper. It tells you that pleasing others is harmless, that tolerance means embracing everything, that unity requires compromise. For Solomon, those whispers came from the women he loved. He thought he could honor their desires without betraying his God. But idolatry is never satisfied with partial devotion. It always demands more, and it's no different today. How often do people bow to the idols of money, success, pleasure, or acceptance, while still claiming to serve God? A heart divided is already a heart conquered. The tragedy of Solomon's idolatry lies in the contrast. This was the man who built the temple, the very place where God's fire once fell from heaven. This was the man who declared in 1 Kings 8:23, "Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below, you who keep your covenant of love with your servants, who continue wholeheartedly in your way." And yet, the same man who once prayed such words was now kneeling before gods of stone and fire. It's like a master artist painting a masterpiece in the morning and vandalizing it by night. The lesson is haunting but clear. Spiritual decline doesn't happen in an instant. It happens step by step, altar by altar, compromise by compromise. Solomon thought he could balance devotion to God with devotion to idols, but balance doesn't exist in matters of the heart. Jesus would later declare in Matthew 6:24, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." What Jesus said about money was just as true for Solomon's idols. You can't divide what belongs fully to God. And so, Jerusalem became a city with two faces, golden in the temple, but shadowed on the hills. The people saw the king who once embodied devotion, now living in contradiction. And if the wisest man alive could fall into idolatry, what hope was there for anyone else? The silent cracks in Solomon's heart had now become visible fractures in his kingdom. The warnings had been spoken long before Solomon ever strayed. God was not silent about the cost of disobedience. In 1 Kings 9:6-7, the Lord declared, "But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I have given you and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them and will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. Israel will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples." Those weren't empty threats. They were divine boundaries. Yet Solomon, the man who once prayed for wisdom above all else, allowed his heart to wander into the very danger God had described. What makes this judgment so striking is that God had appeared to Solomon not once, but twice. Few men in history could claim such an encounter. In 1 Kings 11:9-10, we read, "The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice." Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. Think about that. Divine encounters, personal warnings, direct revelation, and still, he strayed. It reminds us that knowledge alone does not keep us safe. A heart anchored in obedience is what preserves us. The judgment of God was both severe and merciful. Severe because the kingdom would be torn apart. Merciful because it would not happen in Solomon's lifetime, for the sake of David, his father. In 1 Kings 11:11-12, God said, "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son." Imagine the weight of those words. The kingdom would survive Solomon's reign, but the seeds of division had already been planted. His son would inherit not just the throne, but the fractures of his father's choices. Picture it like a house with cracks forming in the foundation. To a visitor, the walls may still look sturdy, the roof still intact, but those who understand construction know the truth. It's only a matter of time before collapse. Solomon's compromises were the cracks, hidden at first, but spreading deeper with every idol, every alliance, every act of disobedience. His children would not inherit stability, but instability. His people would not inherit unity, but division. The consequences of Solomon's fall extended beyond politics. They touched generations. Israel, once united under David and Solomon, would be torn in two: the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. 12 tribes, once brothers, now divided by rivalry and rebellion. The judgment wasn't just about Solomon's heart, it was about the destiny of a nation. His fall became a wound in the story of God's people, one that would echo for centuries. And this is where Solomon's story pierces into our own. How often do we assume that our choices affect only us? The truth is, our compromises ripple outward. A parent's decisions shape their children. A leader's flaws can wound an entire community. Solomon's divided heart became a divided kingdom. And it leaves us with a haunting question. What fractures might our hidden compromises be planting in the lives of those who come after us? The saddest part is that Solomon himself once knew better. In Proverbs 9:10, he had written, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." He knew the principle, he taught it, he built his early reign upon it, but somewhere along the line, knowledge was no longer enough. Wisdom left unapplied became folly. Truth unpracticed became hypocrisy. The very man who defined wisdom with his words destroyed it with his life. So here's the sobering truth. Solomon's story isn't just about a king who lost his way, it's about what happens when the heart drifts, one compromise at a time. If the wisest man alive could fall, what makes us think we're immune? His tragedy is a mirror, reminding us that wisdom without obedience becomes hollow, and greatness without faith collapses. Now the question comes to you. Where are the cracks forming in your own foundation? What small compromises are quietly shaping your future? Don't brush them aside, because what seems harmless today may one day define your downfall. Solomon's life is a warning, but also an invitation to return, to realign, to place God at the center before it's too late. If this stirred something in your heart, don't let it fade away. Subscribe to Luminous Source, activate the notifications, and keep diving with us into mysteries and truths the world often ignores. Because the secrets of the ages were never meant to stay hidden, and your story, unlike Solomon's, can still end in wisdom.